Ben Lorica is principal at Gradient Flow, host of the Data Exchange podcast, and co-chair of the AI Agent Conference and Applied AI Summit. Previously, he served as chief data scientist at O'Reilly Media and as program chair for Strata Data Conference, O'Reilly AI Conference, and TensorFlow World. He also serves as strategic chair for AI at Linux Foundation and advises many companies. All to say, few people have a broader or clearer view of where AI infrastructure is heading than Ben. Ben, I'm so happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
And one thing top of mind, we could get right into it. You have seen a lot of enterprises especially try to adapt. What, from your vantage point, would you advise to enterprises as far as AI infrastructure and strategy there?
Yeah, I think that enterprises really have three choices, right? So one, they can take their existing machine learning platform that they were originally using for forecasting, time series analysis, anomaly detection, and try to shoehorn that and upscale that to generative AI. I think generally that will be a little hard because basically different data types, different workloads, different hardware even. Second option is to basically work with a vendor or focus on using these API endpoints and build something using those, which a lot of people have started with in the technology sector, for example. I think a lot of people started that way. You'll find is maybe one, you can't customize. Secondly, maybe you don't develop actually more than a passing knowledge of these things, which if you believe the hype around AI, it should be a core competency of your team, right? Or your final option is to build something from scratch, a custom AI platform, which I think actually I started noticing this more pronouncedly maybe 18 months ago, maybe even longer than that. But the center of all this action tended to be in the Bay Area around tech companies, right? So the Pinterest of the world, Ubers, those kinds of companies, Lyft. And if you go to talks by these teams, it's around customization. Basically, whatever workload or use case or data type they have, they just couldn't make these kind of vendor or API-based tools work. And so I think my advice to companies around AI infrastructure is understand the centrality of AI, and I think you'll come to the conclusion that some level of customization will benefit you and your company. Even though you don't consider yourself tech forward, I think that there's a lot of benefits to considering some level of customization.
So do you feel like it will also future-proof, right, their talent pool and their tech to adapt as well?
Yes, yeah. And honestly, the more you understand how these things work, the more you are able to actually maximize the utility of AI.
Well, speaking of, you wrote a fantastic newsletter titled The Park Stack, The Future of Production AI. So what is the Park Stack?
So the Park Stack, I started, the same companies that were giving these talks that I alluded to, and actually I'm looking at a graphic that I did almost more than a year ago of where I said, so here are the companies that are doing these custom AI platforms. And it seemed like they always had the same elements, right? They used PyTorch for some notion of model customization because the reality is most companies don't pre-train models from scratch, right? So whatever notion of post-training that they use, so it could be fine-tuning, RL, distillation, whatever, right? So they use PyTorch. Then they have some sort of AI model, obviously, in order to do the post-training, right? That tended to be around the open weights models. So when I first started coming across these companies, Llama was that family models. Obviously now the center of gravity is shifted over to the open weights models from China.
Yeah, deep sea.
And then you need compute, distributed computing, and Ray seem to be the common denominator there. And then to manage your containers and cluster, Kubernetes. So the Park Stack is really a collection of mainly open source, in the case of the models, open weights, components that people are assembling to build this custom AI compute platform. And the details of how they assemble this and how these things work together varies from company to company. But the key is we're now at the point, Linda, where you have these companies that are mature enough that you can take them and then piece them together. And the nice thing is there's relationships that cut across these companies, right? So the PyTorch people work with Ray, the Ray people work with Kubernetes.
Right.
So all the interoperability has been done for you
Yeah,
in
like
many
even
ways.
within DLLM you have, right? It'll have integration between Ray
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Kubernetes.
and then when you get to the inference layer, there's the integration as well, right? And then if you're worried about governance, all these projects are housed inside the Linux Foundation.
Yeah,
So
right. As of recently, Ray joined the Linux Foundation as well, and it's the whole stack is there. As far as stickiness, right, and winnability, I mean, you've seen a lot of like open source AI infra winners in a sense, right? Like even with this stack, why is it that with AI infra things tend to be stickier from your perspective?
infrastructure becomes kind of the foundation within an organization, right? So once people kind of make these design choices, right? So I'm going to design around the park components. The other thing that they realize quickly is each of these components actually has an ecosystem. So then you benefit from all the tools that people have built on top of PyTorch, people have built on top of Kubernetes, and then increasingly people are building on top of Ray. And then Ray itself, obviously, is an ecosystem of libraries for reinforcement learning. You mentioned model serving, right? VLLM and RayServe and Tune, right? So I think the stickiness is not just the individual components, it's the ecosystem and the interoperability of these components.
Yeah. And you mentioned change of compute, like heterogeneous compute and multimodal data. How is that playing into the Park stack?
Oh, I think so. This is why I think, as I mentioned earlier, if you try to take your existing ML infrastructure that you optimize for structured data, right? So for forecasting, it becomes hard, right? So
Yeah.
because basically when you get to generative AI type workloads, now you're talking about text, video, audio, increasingly multimodal. And here, I think, honestly, the central component for the Park stack probably is Ray, right? Because Ray excels at exactly this kind of efficient utilization of hardware, right? So if your data processing pipelines involves, heavy compute that might be done in a GPU, but then the next step might require less and you can pass it off to a CPU. This is the kind of thing that Ray shines in. And honestly, it's not just me that's saying this, it's the people building these tools that are noticing this as well, right? So if you look at this next generation of data engineering tools, a lot of them are built on Ray. Obviously, Ray data is pretty good, but then people are also building tools beyond Ray data on
Right,
top
on
of
top
Ray,
of it.
right? So multimodal data processing, I believe, is going to be essential for any kind of AI infrastructure or platform team.
And what would you think is the most important aspect for companies right now when building production systems, especially right now?
So I think once you get to production, and you alluded to this earlier, one of the things that is very different in this era is inference, right? So inference is increasingly distributed inference. And again, here, this is where the Park stack is just a natural fit. Not only the individual components, but as you mentioned, the emergence of libraries that are built on top of Park, right? So it could
Yeah.
be RayServe or VLLM or SGLang. The other thing that's important is hardware scarcity. So if hardware is scarce, you need a platform that can squeeze as much out of your hardware as possible. So again, of the Park components, this is where Ray probably shines, right? And
Right.
this hardware scarcity people tend to associate with NVIDIA hardware, which is true, but a couple of developments in hardware that people have probably noticed. One, Google did train their latest model on their own hardware, TPUs. So to the extent that people are super excited about Gemini 3, which is actually a pretty good model, one of the things that really caught their eye is the fact that it was trained on TPUs, right? And so here, again, you have the Park stack, specifically Ray and Kubernetes, work hand in hand with TPUs already, right? So that integration is pretty solid. And then, knock on wood, I've been talking about this for a couple of years, but AMD hardware,
Yeah.
right? Has always been good. The software stack has been trailing, but it continues to get better all the time, and AMD is investing in hardware. And guess what? AMD ROCm works well with Ray. So,
We love to hear that.
so if hardware is a concern,
Right.
the Park stack is actually also a good reason for using hardware. And you mentioned lock-in. And part of lock-in is you're using components that are not open source or governed out in the open. again, here's something where the Park stack gives you a lot of reassurance, right? So
So important.
all of the projects, for the most part, are in the Linux Foundation. And actually, if I'm to be honest, then the part of the reason why I finally kind of labeled this the Park stack is I thought that everyone was using these projects, but no one was actually kind of building a community around it. I thought that maybe it's useful, just like LAMP, the LAMP stack back in the era of dynamic websites democratized the ability of companies to build dynamic websites, so the LAMP stack being Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, Perl, Python. So I thought that one of the things that the Park stack did was just gave people confidence to, hey, there's a community around this, we should take a look. And once they look, they realize, hey, there's an active community already building around these components.
Right.
And each of these components is open source, governed out in the open, and also has a ecosystem and community around it. And so just that standardization around open source, I think, is going to be something that the AI community will benefit from. If more people kind of realize that these leading edge teams are building around Park, they'll see the tools, maybe they'll contribute to maybe not the core tools, but the libraries built on top of Park, and then all of us benefit from that.
Absolutely. I remember the excitement seeing that, because I think so much of like adoption and sharing information is also communication and being able to communicate something. And exactly like you said, there was the LAMP stack, and having that name, because so many companies sometimes don't even realize they're kind of using the same stack. They're all aligning the same stack, and this company X does not know that about company Y. And there is a community, and like being able to communicate it even more and get contributions to these open source technologies that are shaping the industry future-wise is fantastic. You mentioned also talent. As far as AI infrastructure talent and enterprises, what is your advice there?
Here's where these projects shine, right? So, because each of these projects are established, there's a lot of talent already. If you are an enterprise and you're saying, well, the Park stack, it seems complicated and these are complicated components, well, to some extent, yes, but to a large extent, that argument is dying every day, right? Because basically, the tools for Ray are getting better every day, getting simpler. Kubernetes has been out there for years now, and so is PyTorch. And the talent pool also that's competent in each of these tools also has realized that all these tools are working well together. It's not like you take PyTorch and go, oh, how do I make sure that PyTorch works well with Ray? No, that problem is solved. How do I make sure Ray works well with Kubernetes? That problem is solved. Right. How do I make sure that these three projects will be useful when I try to customize my open weights model? Well, there's all sorts of resources and tutorials for that now.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, as you were saying, it's so fantastic that there's so many libraries built in, right? You have built-in functionality, you have KubeRay, you have all these other built-in, like within each other and working together across the stack.
And by the way, each of these projects has massive conferences, and you can go to these conferences and learn from fellow practitioners, right? So I think the stereotype that people have with these tools is that it's too advanced and only the most advanced companies in Silicon Valley are using them. But no, I mean, go to these conferences and you realize actually a lot of regular enterprises are using these tools. But you have to just start doing your research and realizing that you don't have to start from scratch. One more thing about the LAMP stack, which I think is a historical anecdote, is that to some extent, I think people credit LAMP for making Linux more mainstream. So before the LAMP stack really took off, Linux was there and people were using it, but LAMP really made Linux more and more mainstream. To the extent that you have a community around a stack, maybe that will help these individual projects as well. And also, one other thing that I guess I kept hammering about the growing ease of use and the growing number of resources for using these components together. I think the fact that I noticed this a while back, and increasingly more and more companies are building around this Park stack, I think should give our listeners and viewers more confidence that this combination is proven operationally at scale, right? So that people have pushed this combination to the hilt in many places at scale. as far as efficiency and operational maturity, I think there's nothing to worry about there.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for your insights. We'll link, of course, the article. And where else can people sign up to your newsletter?
Gradientflow.substack.com, and the conferences I chair, aiconference.com, Agent Conference, AI Agent Conference, and Applied AI Summit. Of course, I'm still helping out with both the Race Summit and Data Plus AI Summit.
Amazing. It's such a privilege getting to chat with you here, Ben. And thank you so much again